Yeah, g'day YouTubers. Tinker O'Toole again here with another video. Today we're going to talk about narrow kerf chains. Can generally sum it up pretty quickly that a narrower kerf chain means that the chain is just thinner. Thinner gauge, thinner chain. What is the benefit of a thinner gauge? Well, first of all, let's just talk about the four gauges that are available. You've got 43 thou, 50 thou, 58 thou, and 63 thou. So to put that into metric, that's 1.1 mil, 1.3, 1.5, and 1.6 for 63 thou. So that's the order. Then you've got 5 different chain sizes. You've got your 1/4 inch. And then you've got 3/8 low profile, 0.325. 3/8 standard and 404. You've even got 1/4 inch micro too, or 1/4 inch low profile, which is used on those little handhelds. So that's really 6 sizes there, not 5 if you want to include that. And the other thing is, a lot of your small saws like the MS-170 or arborist type saws, the MS-194, which is 31.8 cc's, or the 200T, which is 35.2 cc's, all run narrow kerf chains. So what's the idea? Well, quite simply, you run a narrow kerf chain because they're mainly used on small chainsaws to minimize the power loss, because a small chainsaw can bog down very easily with a larger chain on it. So typically, if you get an MS-170, it'll have 43 thou gauge on it, and it'll be 3/8 low profile. A lot of the professional saws, and we're talking about the MS-261, around that region there, that arborists still like to use because they're not cutting big, huge bits of timber up in a cherry picker, all run 0.325. A lot of the professional saws are running 0.325 because it comes in 3 gauges. You've got 50 thou, 58 thou, and 63 thou in 0.325. So it's a really good one to use. It's very similar to a 3/8 chain. And I guess the way that it works is a little bit like this, that a lot of the narrow kerf chains are used on small saws up to 40 cc. Then you go to your 0.325, which will be from 40 cc to 50 cc. Generally 3/8 type chain is used on saws 50 cc right up to 70 cc. When you get to 404 chain, you're generally 90 cc's up to the big beast MS-880. So quite simply put, small saws, small chains, narrower kerf. Big chainsaws, bigger chain, wider kerf. The bigger the tooth, the dimensions of the tooth overall, the larger it is, it needs much more horsepower, but it can take a bigger bite, a bigger chip. It can bite in deep. So if every tooth bites deeper into the log, it'll cut through the log quicker. But if you were trying to put a larger chain on a smaller chainsaw, it's going to bog down straight away. So it's really pretty straightforward. Now, the only exception to the rule is a little bit different in Husqvarna's X-cut. So Husqvarna came out with an X-cut, I think it was in 2016 or something like that there. And the tooth was slightly thinner, so that's a narrower kerf, meaning that it would cut through the log more efficient than the standard full chisel. Then still went one step further and brought out their Hexa. Hexa is probably, I think, a standard full chisel chain on a 3/8 is roughly 4.5 millimeters in width, the tooth. So we're talking about the width here, roughly 4.5 mil. On Hexa, it's about 4.1 mil. So it's about 10% smaller in width. Totally different profile. It's a hexagonal profile on the side plate. and it definitely cuts better. So that's their take on a narrower kerf. So Yeah, we've seen a few things happening with the narrow kerf, but generally speaking, the narrow kerf is associated with small chainsaws. But admittedly, Hexa, according to Still, they say that Hexa was developed for the forest industry, yet they don't have Hexa on 404 chain yet. Now, it's interesting enough, if we look at the dry weight, the power head of an MS660, you're looking at about 7.4 kilos. On an MS880, you're looking at 10.1 kilos or something like that. Add a bar and a chain. A bar and a chain depends on if it's a 36-inch bar and chain, you're looking over 2 kilos. Add your fluids, there's over another kilo. So, you know, you're talking at least 14 kilo weight for an MS880. And if you're talking about an MS660 or something like that, you could quite easily be pushing the scales near 10 kilo by the time you put a 25-inch bar on it, and 404 chain and oil and fuel. That gets extremely difficult to use all day. Tires you out very quickly. And that's why they developed a lot of the professional saws, because if you're out there in the field, in the forest, and you're cutting things down, I guess it's horses for courses. The last thing you want to be doing is wielding some big, huge chainsaw. It's too heavy. That's why they started developing a lot of the lightweight bars as well. And that's why a lot of professionals out there will have half a dozen different type of chainsaws, from the light one to the heavy one. So you select, if you need a big chainsaw, because you've got a big log, you'll need that big chainsaw. If you're doing some small felling, then you only need a MS261 or something like that, a professional chainsaw. They're generally fairly lightweight. It's interesting enough, you could look at an MS170 and they weigh about 4.1 kilo, yet the MS194 weighs 3.3 kilo. So it's 800 grams lighter, but 800 grams is fairly significant. When we're talking, 3.3 kilo, 800 grams a lot. So that's where the lightweight bars. And if you've got one of those arbor saw and you're up in a cherry picker, I can tell you right now, it doesn't matter how big the tree is, you wouldn't want to be using an MS880 or an MS660. So you can clearly see that it's horses for courses. It's what suits you. Just because a chainsaw is bigger, it's got more power in it, doesn't mean it's going to be suitable for you. It depends what you're going to be cutting. I just wanted to sort of emphasize the fact of why we've got narrower kerf chains. Now, there is another thing that you can do. Let's just say, because chainsaws aren't cheap. You know, here in Australia, if you were to buy an MS880, you're looking at over $3,000. That is a lot of money. And an MS660, you're looking at about $2,500. And an MS311 or something, you're looking at about $1,400. So chainsaws aren't cheap in Australia. They're not cheap, especially the Still and Husqvarnas. They're expensive. So let's just say you've got a 50cc chainsaw. And a 50cc chainsaw, look, you probably have an 18-inch bar on it. Let's just say you wanted to put a 20-inch bar on it. Okay, you put a 20-inch bar on it, and let's just say the 18-inch was 058 gauge. You could put an 050 gauge on it, so a 50 thou, so you could drop, and that's a big drop. That's almost 20%, not quite, but it's, you know, from 58 thou to 50 thou, that's a fairly big drop in the gauge. The chain will weigh a lot less, and if you were to get a narrow kerf in that chain, that would be significantly lighter. So while it may be significantly lighter, the other thing is, if you go to the narrower kerf, you'll find out that it will cut a little bit slower, but the saw won't bog down. So therefore you could put the 20-inch bar on. So we're talking about a 50cc saw. 20-inch bar, 050 gauge, so 50 thou gauge. And we're going to run a narrower kerf chain. Now, The other thing that you can do, and a lot of people probably don't do this, is that you could run a skip chain. So, and I'm not too sure if they sell skip, whether they sell it in 50 thou, but even if they sell it in 3/8, and I've got 3/8 skip chains, you can get a longer bar. So let's say an MS660 recommended bar length is 36 inches. That's the maximum bar length that they recommend. You could go slightly longer and put a skip chain on. A full skip chain runs 30% less teeth. Now, the only other problem that you've got, and bear this in mind, is that when you go to a longer bar, you've got to make sure that it's still going to oil the chain. So when they recommend an MS660 to have a maximum length of 36 inches, they're saying that the chain, when the adjustable oiler on the bottom is turned up to maximum, that's good enough for 36 inch. If you go to 46 inch or 42 inch or something like that there, you might find out it doesn't oil as good. If that was the case, you might tend to go a little bit slower using the saw. So, but still would err on the side of caution. I know people that run much bigger bars than 36 inch and they run skip chains on the MS660. And they're not running it day in or day out. They just may have a big, large log that they've got to get through, and they prefer to run, say, a 42-inch bar rather than a 36-inch. And they may have that 42-inch bar just for those occasions when they've got some big tree that they've got to cut down. So, just to briefly recap, it's pretty simple that a small chainsaw has a smaller bar on it in length and in width, and a larger chainsaw has a longer bar on it and a longer width, and 063 or 63 thou is your widest bar or drive link. So that's it in a nutshell. So it's pretty straightforward, and as I said, if you wanted to put a longer bar on there, you can do that, but go for a narrower gauge and yeah, try and balance it out a little bit. I'm only talking 2 inches. And an example would be that if you had a 14-inch saw and you wanted to go to a 16-inch saw, as in the MS 170 and the MS 180. An MS 170 comes out with a 14-inch bar, and an MS 180 comes out with a 16-inch bar, and the MS 80 is just a fraction bigger in size, not even a cc, or maybe a cc. I think it's 32 cc's. Whereas the MS 170 is 30.5, something like that. There's not much in it. So I run a 16-inch bar on both. I don't have any issues whatsoever. But remember, still is trying to not advise you to overload the saw. So if you put a bigger bar on than what's recommended, you do that at your own risk. And that's fine. I understand that, so I've got no problems with it. So that's the rundown. That's my take on Narrow Kerf. They've got their place, and I prefer bigger, powerful saws. But at the end of the day, when they're getting bloody heavy, then I prefer a much smaller saw. And a Narrow Kerf chain, like a Hexa, is fine, but it only comes in 0.63 gauge on the Hexa. They don't make, say, 3/8 low profile Hexa at the moment, but in the future, I would say still may make one. So we'll see. We'll keep our eyes open for that. But interesting enough, if you want to talk about Narrow Kerf chains also, on the Hexa X-cut, you can get that on Narrow Kerf as well. So Husqvarna's X-cut goes right to the narrow gauges as well, whereas still on the Hexa does not. It's only in 3/8 and it's on 063 gauge. You can't get Hexa in 404 or any other gauge at all. Anyway, as I said, that's my take on it. So while we've spoken about Narrow Kerf chains, mainly used in small chainsaws, and occasionally may be used in other chainsaws if you want a longer bar and you go to a narrower kerf. That's another option. So recently, since about 2016, we had the introduction of Husqvarna's Hex cut, which went to Narrow Kerf. And not long after that, Hexa, which is about, it could be 2018 or 2019, something like that, I can't remember. Actually, I think it was, I think Hexa came out in early 2021. So it's only about 3 years or so. It's not that long. And it's 4.1 millimeters wide. So first of all, we'll just explain that. The standard full chisel chain from, this is a 3/8 chain, from Stihl is approximately 4.5 millimeters in width from one side to the other side. With Hexa, they've dropped it to 4.1 millimeters. So that's 10% narrower. But if you look at the picture, when both chains or both cutters, left and right, will cut a groove in the timber of approximately 7.5 millimeters in width. So when you reduce and you take 10% off that, that's going to be about, I don't know, 6 point something millimeters. It's going to reduce more than 10% anyway. So in Husqvarna's X-cut, it's down to 4.2 millimeters wide, the cutter. So you've got this overlap, how the two teeth overlap and how the width of the cutter can vary. So there's a little bit of area of play that you can sort of play around with there. So it's working that out against performance. So a lot of work in the laboratory. What happens in the future? I don't know. I can't see a lot of improvements in this area because Husqvarna have had their X-cut for quite a while, and when Stihl released Hexa outperforms the X-cut. The only thing that I will say, you can't get a file, any type of hexagonal file at the moment for this. So the best way to file this type of chain is, I tend to use a hexagonal file from Velobe that they used for square ground, and I use two files. So I use a normal 5.2 or 5.5 millimeter file, and I finish off with a hexagonal file to put the little beak on the X-cut, because it looks a bit like this. Hang on, got a bit of a slope on it. So when you look at the X-cut, it has about 1.7 or 1.6 millimeter angle of about 45 degrees on the front here. You put a round file through that and you're going to destroy that edge. So what I tend to do is put a round file through it, and then I finish off with a hexagonal type file to get that. So a little bit of mucking around there. That's if you file. If you use the grinder, then it's a lot easier to reprofile the wheel. So there's probably not much else I can say about Narrow Kerf chains, except they've certainly helped a big improvement in Hexa. Hexa claiming that it's 10% faster than their standard full chisel. I haven't seen any claims by X-cut to say what percentage it is. I don't know in the future if there's what we're going to see. The only other thing that I'm seeing at the moment is titanium coated chains. But I haven't seen any other new profiles in recent years apart from X-cut and Hexa. So that's about it on that. Just to really briefly recap again, Narrow Kerf chains are for underpowered chainsaws that don't have enough guts to pull a big heavy chain through. So if you put a smaller, narrower gauge chain on, for the horsepower that's relevant to pull that smaller chain through. And that's it in a nutshell. So small chainsaws, small gauge chain, narrower kerf. Larger chainsaws, larger gauge, larger width teeth. That's just the way it is. Horses for courses. Anyway, thanks for watching. Give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. Comments are welcome. Bye for now.